tell you this story in a very simple way. I was spending a few days in a cabin in Ontario, a beautiful place, full of nature. The cabin was part of a small community, with 12 cabins organized around a park full of trees, a playground, and even a picnic area. In addition, the cabin was close to a lake where we could swim, fish, and canoe. During our stay, my brother and I became friends with a boy named Brandon, who was about 14 years old. He liked to walk alone and preferred to be with us rather than with his family. I honestly didn't understand why he didn't like being with his parents. I was the kind of kid who always did what my parents asked, followed the rules, and tried to avoid trouble. That's why I didn't like Brandon very much. He was a bit of a troublemaker. But since my brother thought he was cool, I ended up going along, because I wanted to be like my brother, who I admired a lot. One day, Brandon had the idea of sneaking out at night, and my brother agreed right away. Since we shared a room, I didn't have much of a choice and ended up going too. At first, we just stayed in the park enjoying the cool breeze and the silence of the night, but we soon got tired and wanted something more exciting. I suggested we go back to bed, but since Brandon and my brother were older, they decided we should explore the forest. I tried to argue, but they didn't pay me any attention. So, with Brandon's cell phone as a flashlight, we went. The forest wasn't very dense, and we could even hear the distant noise of a highway. After a short walk, I wanted to go back, but I didn't want to go alone in the dark, so I stayed with them. Suddenly, the forest became strange. No sounds of crickets, owls, or wind. I pointed this out, and everyone stopped to listen. My brother asked me to be quiet, irritated, thinking I was making noise. But I said I hadn't done anything. That's when we heard it together. Heavy, labored breathing, like that of a sick pig. Just as I was about to say it wasn't me, we saw two blue lights shining above us, swaying from side to side. It seemed like we were hypnotized by these lights, when suddenly a terrifying moan cut through the silence, as if someone was trying to scream but couldn't breathe properly. We immediately started running. I, with my small legs, soon fell behind. My brother and Brandon took off ahead, leaving me alone. Whatever was chasing us seemed to be in the trees, breaking branches and making the trees shake. I couldn't run anymore, so I threw myself into a bush. Bad luck for me, because it was a bush full of thorns and I got cut all over. I tried to stay still, even with the pain, and that's when I heard something heavy fall near where I was hiding. The blue lights appeared again, but this time I realized they weren't lights. They were eyes. Those eyes belonged to a tall, thin creature with gray skin and long, clawed arms. She stayed there for a while, searching, as if she knew I was nearby. I hid in that bush for hours, without moving. When the sun started to rise, I gathered all my strength and ran in the direction I thought was the cabin. I was hurt and bleeding, but I kept running until I finally stumbled onto a highway. The next thing I remember is waking up in a hospital, with machines around me and people worried about me. Someone saw me coming out of the woods and called for help. When I tried to tell them what had happened, no one believed me. They thought I had imagined it all because I had been lost in the woods for so long. My brother didn't come home until morning, and when they realized I was missing, they organized a search party. But by then, they had already received the news that I had been found. That happened more than 7 years ago, and since then, I have spent hours on the internet trying to find out what that creature was. But to this day, I have not found any answers. This happened about 2 years before the pandemic, at a time when I was not doing well. My mental health and my relationship with my parents were in a bad way, and this made me feel alone and misunderstood. To make matters worse, one of my best friends moved away, which was a shock to me. I felt empty and didn't know how to deal with it. Soon, I started having terrible nightmares. In all these dreams, what always happened was that the place where I was got darker and darker. It felt like a black mist was taking over everything, like that scene in The Lord of the Rings when Gandalf gets angry and everything goes dark. Only, in my dreams, it was much scarier. I felt a heavy chill in my stomach and a terrible fear, even if nothing had happened yet. If there was someone in my dream, they would disappear when the darkness came. Or suddenly, everyone would start staring at me with a blank, lifeless look. And this feeling of fear got worse, It felt like something was gripping me so tightly that I could barely breathe. Sometimes, I even felt like I was being suffocated. A loud buzzing sound would appear in my head, like the sound of a TV off the air, mixed with the noise of insects. I couldn't think or speak, and it seemed impossible to fight it. This would last until I managed to force myself to wake up, but the fear wouldn't go away. Sometimes, I would stay awake for hours, because if I went back to sleep, the dream would continue where it had left off. Then 2021 came, and I ended up moving away from my parents. I went through several difficulties and big changes in my life. At that time, I went to live with my best friend, Amelia, in a cabin in the countryside. She is super religious and an incredible person. I slept in the attic of the cabin on a small mattress. One night, while Amelia was away taking care of the children, I was left alone there. It had been over a month since I had those nightmares, but this time, it was like being thrown straight into a movie without understanding anything. In the dream, I stumbled out of the cabin, got into my Jeep, and began driving desperately along the dark roads. I called Amelia, telling her that I was going to the hospital because something very bad was about to happen. She asked me what was wrong, but her voice began to fade, and in its place a low, scary voice appeared, whispering strange words in my ear. When I looked in the mirror of the car, the headlights suddenly went out and would not turn on at all. Then something different happened. I felt a huge hand touching the back of my head, and it was so big that it covered almost the entire back of my neck, with the fingers reaching my forehead. I felt claws scratching my skin. The hand pulled my hair hard, throwing me back into the car seat. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out of my mouth. Suddenly, I remembered that Amelia had taught me the Lord's Prayer and told me to ask for God's protection. At that moment, I began to pray silently and beg God to help me. As soon as I did that, the grip on my hair began to loosen. The strange feeling in my stomach and the ringing in my ears began to fade. Finally, I woke up for real. I sat up quickly and looked up at the attic window. That's when I saw, for the first time outside of my dreams, two red eyes staring at me through the window. The scary thing was that the cabin had no trees nearby or anything for anyone to stand on. That meant the thing staring at me must have been very tall, over 8 feet tall. I called Amelia, terrified, and she prayed with me over the speakerphone until I calmed down. After that night, I started going to church with her, praying regularly. Since then, I haven't had those nightmares again, and I haven't seen that creature again either. I now live alone in a new apartment, but I keep in touch with Amelia and continue to pray every night. I know some people might think I'm crazy or that it wasn't real, but when you're faced with something really bad, you just know. When I was younger, I spent a lot of time at my friend James's house. We were so close that he felt like a brother to me, since I didn't have any siblings and I didn't get along with my parents. I loved hanging out there, but sometimes I could tell his parents were starting to get annoyed. We spent a lot of time in the backyard, where James had his own little space with a couch and video games, but his dad would always come knocking on the door, saying it was late and that James needed to sleep. In reality, he wanted me to leave. So when we heard the knock, I would leave right away because I didn't want to cause trouble. When I got home, it was horrible. My mom would start yelling at me for anything. The dishes, the laundry, even the washing machine. I knew she was stressed, but it just made me feel worse. At the time, I was still figuring out my life and didn't drive, so I would walk to James's house, which would take about 10 minutes. One night, I stayed at James's house until late, almost midnight. We knew his dad was going to knock on the door at any moment, so I decided to leave early. I punched James goodbye and left. It was pitch black outside. As I got closer to my street, I started hearing strange noises, like grunting. I was curious and walked slowly, listening carefully. The sound got louder as I got closer. Soon, I saw some gray hair in the bushes, and then I realized it was an old lady on the ground moaning. I ran to help her and put her in the recovery position, which I had learned in school. She didn't say anything, just made these strange sounds. I waited there for the medics to arrive, which took about 5 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. I didn't know what else to do, and the thought that she might die there scared me. Luckily, the medics arrived and took her away. After that, Whenever I see her in the garden, I always wave to her. That was an unexpected moment, but since then, nothing strange has ever happened during my walks.